I trusted my husband around my family more than anyone. Until one wedding night, one locked door, and one shocking moment revealed a betrayal so deep I can never look at them the same again. My cousin's wedding was supposed to be the best night of the summer. Open bar. A band that actually knew how to read a room. A venue on the water with string lights that made everything look like the inside of a memory. My whole family under one roof for the first time in 3 years. My grandmother in a gold dress she'd bought for the occasion and told me cost more than her first car. I had been looking forward to it for months. I spent an hour getting ready. My husband James watched me from the doorway of the bathroom the way he sometimes did when he was in a good mood and felt like saying something. He said, "You look incredible." I said, "Don't make me redo my makeup." He laughed. We drove there together. Held hands in the car. We danced in the first hour. He is not a natural dancer and he knows it, and he dances anyway because he knows I love to, and that's who he was when I married him. A man who dances badly on purpose because it makes me laugh. I thought about that drive home later. About the hand-holding. About the bad dancing. About how a night can contain two completely different versions of itself, and you only find out about the second one when it's too late to go back and see the first one differently. My name is Simone. I'm 35. James is 38. And I want to tell you what I found at 11:47 p.m. in a corridor outside the wedding reception because it is the most important thing I have ever been in the wrong place to see. My family is big and loud and circular. By circular I mean the gathering style. People orbit. You talk to someone for 20 minutes and then you drift, and then you find them again an hour later and pick up in the middle of the sentence you left. Nobody has a fixed position at a gathering. Everyone moves. James had always moved well with my family. That was one of the things I loved about him. Some husbands struggle with the volume and the history they don't share and the inside jokes that require 20 years of context. James didn't struggle. He found people. He remembered things from the last time he'd seen them. My Uncle Robert had mentioned something about a project at a family dinner 2 years ago, and James asked about it at the next family event. Robert talked about it for 30 minutes. James listened to all of it. I trusted him with my family the way you trust someone who has earned it over 7 years of consistently being the right person in the room. That trust was real. What it was built on, I found out at 11:47 p.m., was something I had not fully understood. I was looking for the bathroom. The main bathrooms off the reception hall had a line. Someone at my table said there were bathrooms down the corridor past the second set of doors and to turn left at the end. I turned left at the end. There is a window at the end of that corridor that faces the garden. The garden is lit at night with small lanterns. The lights from inside the corridor don't reach all the way to the window. I saw them before they saw me. James and my sister Nadine. I need to stop and tell you about Nadine before I go any further. She is 32. 3 years younger than me. She and I shared a bedroom until I was 15. She was the person I called when I got engaged. She was the person I called when I had a miscarriage 4 years ago and couldn't tell anyone else yet. She's the one who showed up that same evening with food I hadn't asked for and stayed until I fell asleep. She was my maid of honor. She stood at the front of that church and held my flowers. James stood on the other side of the altar. And there, in the corridor outside my cousin's wedding reception, with the garden lanterns lighting the window behind them, they were standing close together in a way that had its own language. I stood at the end of the corridor. They hadn't seen me yet. I don't know exactly how long I stood there before James looked up. It felt long. It was probably seconds. When he saw me, his face went through things I could not process in real time. Shock first. Then something that was trying to become something else and couldn't find the shape. Nadine saw his face change and turned. She saw me. Nobody said anything for a moment. I looked at my husband. I looked at my sister. I looked at the specific way they were standing in the space between them and what the space and the posture and the corridor and 11:47 p.m. all added up to. Then I turned around and walked back down the corridor. Not running. Walking. Back through the second set of doors. Back into the reception. The band was playing something. My grandmother was on the dance floor. My cousin was laughing with someone I didn't recognize. The string lights were doing what string lights do. I picked up my clutch from the table. I walked out the main doors. I stood in the parking lot. I called my Aunt Deborah, who is not a person in the middle of any of this and who had driven herself and would understand, without me explaining everything, that I needed a ride. She came outside 4 minutes later. She took one look at me and said, "Get in the car." She didn't ask anything on the drive. She took me to her house. She made tea. She sat across from me and waited. I told her what I had seen. Not everything. I didn't have everything yet. I told her the corridor, the window, the two people, the way they were standing. She listened to all of it. When I finished, she said, "How long do you think?" I said, "I don't know." She said, "Do you want to go home tonight?" I said, "Not yet." She said, "You can stay here." I said, "James is going to come looking for me." She said, "Let me deal with James." She texted him from her phone. Said I wasn't feeling well and was staying at her place and she'd have me home in the morning. He texted back immediately. Said okay. Said to feel better. Said he loved me. He said he loved me while standing in the parking lot of the venue where I had just walked away from him in a corridor outside my cousin's wedding. He texted, "I love you." My aunt showed me the response. I looked at it for a moment. Then I said, "I need to sleep." She put me in her guest room. I lay there in the dark for a long time. The morning. I drove home at 8. My aunt offered to come with me. I said no. I needed the drive. James was in the kitchen when I came in. He looked like a man who had not slept. He had his coffee mug in his hand and he set it down when I came through the door and he said, "Simone." I said, "Don't start." He said, "I need to talk to you." I said, "I know what I saw." He said, "Can you let me explain?" I said, "James, I know what I saw. I don't need an explanation of what I saw. What I need is the rest of it." He said, "The rest of what?" I said, "How long?" He looked at the kitchen table. I said, "How long?" He said, 8 months. I put my bag down on the counter. I said, "My maid of honor." He said, "I know." I said, "The person who was at the front of our church." He said, "I know." I said, "The person I called when I had the miscarriage." He looked up when I said that. I said, "She knew about the miscarriage. She held my hand through it. And she was all ready." I stopped. He said, "Simone." I said, "Don't say my name right now." He was quiet. I said, "I need you to go somewhere today. I need the apartment to myself." He said, "We should talk." I said, "Not today. Today I need you not to be here." He said, "Simone. Please. I love you. I know that sounds." I said, "James." He stopped. I said, "I love you too. That's what makes this the worst thing I have ever experienced. Now please go somewhere for the day." He went. What I did with the day. I sat with it first. Alone in the apartment with the windows and the quiet and the particular way the morning light comes in that I have always liked. I sat with it for an hour. Then I called my attorney. His name is Patrick. I had used him for a business matter 2 years ago. He did family law as well. He answered on the second ring. I said, "I need some information about divorce proceedings." He said, "What happened?" I said, "I found out my husband has been having an affair with my sister." Silence. He said, "I'm sorry." I said, "Can we meet this week?" He said, "I can see you tomorrow morning." I said, "I'll be there." I'm not telling you this because I had decided. I'm telling you this because I had learned something from watching people around me handle hard situations badly. The people who handle them badly do the emotional work before the practical work. They confront and cry and make decisions in the acute phase and then find out later what the acute phase decisions cost them. I was not going to let the acute phase make my decisions. Patrick would tell me what I was entitled to, what the process looked like, what documentation would matter. Then I would decide. Nadine. She called at noon. I stared at her name on the screen for 3 rings. Then I answered. She said, "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from right now." I said, "You are?" She said, "I'm not going to try to explain it on the phone. I don't think there's anything I can say on the phone." I said, "There's nothing you can say anywhere." She said, "I know." I said, "I called you from the hospital." She said, "I know." I said, "Nadine, I called you from the hospital the day I lost the baby. You were already sleeping with my husband." Silence. She said, "Yes." I said, "That's all I needed to hear from you today." I hung up. I sat in the apartment. I did not cry. I had cried the night before in my aunt's guest room until I was empty. There was nothing left for that particular wave. What I had instead was clarity. The specific cold clarity that comes when you have been hit by something so large that the emotional response is temporarily suspended and what remains is just the facts of the situation arranged in a line. She was at the hospital. She held my hand. She had already been sleeping with my husband. Those are the facts. Arranged in a line. I looked at them for a long time. Patrick. I met with him Tuesday morning. An hour. He walked me through everything. He asked, "Do you want to save the marriage or end it?" I said, "I don't know yet." He said, "That's honest?" He said, "Either way, gather. Don't move money. Don't change behavior. Keep things stable while you decide." I said, "James doesn't know I've come to see you." He said, "Keep it that way until you're ready." He said, "How are you doing?" The real answer. I said, "I'm in the fact stage. I'm not in the feeling stage yet." He said, "That's actually a useful place to be right now." I said, "I know. I'm trying to stay here as long as I can." He said, "The feeling stage will come. You'll be ready for it." I said, "I know." He asked one more thing before I left. He said, "Your sister. Is she likely to be around your family in the coming weeks?" I said, "There are 2 more family events this summer." He said, "How do you want to handle those?" I said, "I'll let you know when I've decided what I'm handling." He said, "Fair enough." James. He came home that evening. He had spent the day at a friend's. He came in quiet. He sat across from me. I said, "I'm going to tell you what I need and I need you to hear it without making it a conversation right now." He said, "Okay." I said, "I need 2 weeks where I'm making no permanent decisions. I need you to have no contact with Nadine during those 2 weeks. And I need you to be honest with me when I ask questions, even when the honest answer is bad." He said, "Yes to all 3. I said, "I have questions right now." He said, "Ask them." I said, "Was it only her?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Was it physical from the beginning?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Was there any crossover? Any time when what was happening with her and what was happening with us were in the same 24 hours?" He looked at the table. I said, "James." He said, "Yes." I said, "How many times?" He said, "I don't have an exact number." I said, "Approximate." He said, "Many times." I said, "Okay." I said, "I'm going to need some time to sit with all of that." He said, "I know." He said, "I need to tell you something else." I said, "What?" He said, "I ended it. Last night. I called her after you left and I ended it." I said, "That's not something you get credit for." He said, "I know. I'm not asking for credit. I'm telling you because you asked for honesty." I said, "Okay." I said, "I'll let you know when I'm ready for more conversation." He said, "I'll be here." He stayed in the apartment. The guest room. His choice. He made that decision without me having to ask. That surprised me. I'm not sure what to do with that yet. My family. My Aunt Deborah is the only one who knows. She hasn't said anything to anyone. I asked her not to and she hasn't. The rest of my family went home from my cousin's wedding thinking it was a beautiful night. They danced. They saw my grandmother in her gold dress. They watched the couple cut the cake. They went home not knowing what was in the corridor. Eventually they'll know. That's inevitable. The shape of what happens next will tell them even if the words don't. Nadine and I won't be what we were at the next family event. People will notice. My mother will ask. My grandmother will have something to say. I'm not ready for that part yet. Right now I'm in the 2 weeks. What the 2 weeks look like. James makes coffee in the morning. He leaves it on the counter with a note that says the temperature and the time in case I want to reheat it. This is a thing he has always done. He started doing it the first week we lived together and has never stopped. I have been drinking the coffee. I'm not sure what that means. Maybe nothing. Maybe it just means I drink coffee in the mornings and it's there and I drink it. Or maybe it means something about the specific domestic texture of a life built over 7 years. The fact that the coffee is there every morning in the way it has always been there. The note with the temperature. I don't know what I'm building toward. I know what I had. 7 years of hand-holding in the car and bad dancing and coffee notes and a man who asked my Uncle Robert about his project 2 years later. I know what was happening inside those 7 years. 8 months of something in the corridor. I know what was lost the moment I turned the corner. Not just the marriage as I understood it. The version of my sister I thought I had. The person who held my hand at the hospital. That's the loss that sits underneath the marriage loss. The one that keeps surfacing when I'm not expecting it. Nadine. My mother called. She doesn't know anything yet, but she has her mother's instinct about when something is wrong and something is wrong. She said, "How are you feeling after the wedding? You left early." I said, "I wasn't feeling well." She said, "James said you were tired." I said, "Yes." She said, "Simone." I said, "Mom?" She said, "Is everything okay?" I said, "I'm working through something. I'll tell you when I'm ready." She was quiet. Then she said, "You know I'm here." I said, "I know." She said, "Whatever it is." I said, "I know." She said, "Does it involve your sister?" The question landed differently than she probably meant it to. I said, "I'll call you soon. I promise." She said, "Okay." She trusts me to come to her when I'm ready. That's another thing I have in my family. People who wait for you to come instead of pulling you toward them before you're ready. I'll come to her when I know what I'm coming with. The corridor. I've replayed it many times. Not to make it worse. Because the brain does what it does, and when you have something you can't unsee, it finds ways to show it to you again. What I see: the window at the end of the corridor. The garden lanterns. The way the light inside doesn't quite reach the window. James. Nadine. The space between them. James looking up. His face. Then hers. Then nothing, because I turned around. That's what I have. A corridor at 11:47 p.m. and a window with garden lights behind it, and two people whose combined history with me is the history of my entire adult life. I trusted him around my family for 7 years. I trusted her my whole life. Both of those things were real. The corridor is also real. I'm holding all of it at the same time, and I'm staying in the fact stage for as long as I can, and when the feeling stage comes fully, I'll hold that too. That's what I can tell you about where I am. The coffee is on the counter every morning. I drink it. I haven't decided what that means yet. But I'm still deciding. And as long as I'm still deciding, nothing is finished. That's where I am. Still in it. Still deciding. Still getting up every morning and drinking the coffee and choosing what today looks like. That's all I can do. That's what I'm doing. Aunt Deborah. She texted me Monday. Said she was thinking about me. Said she was available anytime, day or night. Said she wouldn't say anything to anyone. I texted back, "I know. Thank you." She said, "Your grandmother kept asking where you went. I told her you weren't feeling well. She said you looked pale when she saw you earlier, but she thought you were just tired from the drive." I said, "Thank her for me when you see her." She said, "She also said you were the best dressed person at the wedding. She wanted you to know." I laughed for the first time since Saturday. Just a small one. Brief. But real. My grandmother in her gold dress, noticing what everyone was wearing, filing it away to report later. Some things stay the same. That matters more than I expected it to. James and I talked again on day 5. Not planned. We were both in the kitchen at the same time, and it was late and the apartment was quiet, and he said, "Can I ask you something?" I said, "Yes." He said, "What are you thinking about? When you're sitting in the evenings? What's actually going through your head?" I said, "I'm thinking about time." He said, "What about time?" I said, "I'm trying to understand how 8 months fit inside 7 years. How they exist at the same time. How I was living in one thing and something else was happening inside it." He said, "I don't have a way to explain that." I said, "I know." I said, "I'm also thinking about Nadine." He said, "What about her?" I said, "She knew about the miscarriage. I called her first. You were at work and I couldn't reach you, and I called her." He said, "I know." I said, "She knew what it cost me. She was there. And she was all ready." He said, "Yes." I said, "That's the part I keep getting stuck on. Not you. Her." He said nothing. I said, 7 years with you I have some framework for. You and I have history I can put it against. I know what we had before and what this is against it." I said, "With her I don't have that same framework. She's my sister. She's been my sister my whole life. There's no before to measure against because the before is everything." He said, "I'm sorry for the part that's about her. I know that's the part that's about more than me." I looked at him. He was right. He is often right about the things that matter. That used to be one of the things I loved most about him. I said, "Yes. That's the part that's about more than you." We sat in the kitchen for a while after that. Not saying much. Just in the same space. That's different from where we were on Sunday. I don't know what to do with different. But it's there. The miscarriage. I've thought about whether to include this because it's the most private thing I have. But I keep returning to it and I think it's important to say. 4 years ago I was 10 weeks pregnant. We had told almost no one. James knew. My doctor knew. And I called Nadine because I needed someone who wasn't James and the bleeding had started and I was scared. She came within an hour. She brought food I couldn't eat and stayed until I fell asleep. In the morning she was still there. She made coffee and sat with me and we talked about other things that had nothing to do with it, because that's what I needed and she knew that without me saying so. I thought that was her knowing me. I understand now that she knew me because she was paying close attention to me for her own reasons. That the attention had something in it I didn't see. I can't take back the comfort of that night. It happened. She was there. I needed her and she came. I can't take back the comfort and I can't keep what I thought it was. Both of those things are true at the same time. That's the hardest one. That's the one that surfaces at 3 a.m. when the fact stage slips and the feeling stage moves in. I let myself have the 3 a.m. ones. Then morning comes and I drink the coffee. The wedding photographs. My cousin sent the preview photos on Monday. Text to the whole family. Little hearts from everyone. I open the album. There are photos of James and me dancing. 3 of them. In 2 of them we are laughing. In one his face is turned toward mine and the expression he has is one I recognize. The specific way he looks at me when he thinks I'm not paying attention. There are photos of Nadine. She is laughing in most of them. She is beautiful. She was always beautiful. There are no photos of the corridor. That's not how wedding photographs work. They capture the string lights and the dancing and the grandmother in gold. Not what's in the corridors at 11:47. I looked at the photos for a long time. Then I closed the album. I haven't gone back to it since. Maybe I will. Not yet. Patrick called on Friday. A check-in. Brief. Professional. He said, "Where are you?" I said, "Still in the 2 weeks." He said, "Any movement on which direction?" I said, "Not yet." He said, "Good. Nothing wrong with that." He said, "Has anyone else in the family become aware?" I said, "Just my aunt." He said, "At some point the family situation will have its own timeline." I said, "I know." He said, "Do you want to talk through that now or later?" I said, "Later." He said, "Whenever you're ready." He said, "Call me anytime. Doesn't have to be a formal meeting." I said, "I know. That's why I called you." He said, "You're handling this well." I said, "I'm handling it one day." He said, "That's handling it well." Day 11. James knocked on the door of the room I've been using in the evenings. Reading room. The room with the good light and the bookshelves. He said, "I brought you something." He had a plate. Something from the kitchen. He'd made dinner again. He has been making dinner since the Sunday after the wedding. Without being asked. Without saying anything about it. He just makes it and leaves it or brings it wherever I am. I said, "Thank you." He said, "Can I ask you something?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you think there's a version of this where we're okay?" I said, "I don't know yet." He said, "I know you don't know. I'm asking what you think. Right now." I looked at the plate he brought me. 7 years of dinner made by this person. The bad dancing. The coffee with the note. The asking my Uncle Robert about the project 2 years later. And 8 months in a corridor. I said, "I think there might be a version where we're okay. I don't know if we're the people who can get to it." He said, "I want to try to be those people." I said, "I know." He said, "Do you?" I said, "Yes. I can see that you mean it." He said, "Is that enough to work with?" I said, "I don't know yet. Maybe." He said, "Okay." He didn't push. He left me with a plate. Maybe. That's where I am on day 11. Maybe. Nadine texted on day 12. Just 2 lines. She said, "I'm not asking for anything. I know there's nothing to ask for. I just want you to know I love you and I know that doesn't mean anything right now and I'm saying it anyway." I read it 3 times. I thought about all the times she had said it before. The texture of a lifetime of it. Every holiday and goodbye hug and phone call. "I love you." I thought about what it means that she said it now, knowing what I know. People can love each other and still do terrible things to each other. That's the thing I'm learning. That love doesn't prevent the terrible things. It just makes them more terrible when they happen. She loves me. She also stood in that corridor. Both things are true. I'm not ready to say both things are okay. I'm not sure I'll ever be ready for that. But I'm starting to understand that both things can be true at the same time without one canceling the other. I didn't reply. Not yet. When I'm ready, I'll reply. The last thing before the 2 weeks end. My grandmother called me. Not a text. A call. She is 78 years old and she calls when she has something to say. She said, "Your aunt tells me you've had a hard few days." I said, "Yes." She said, "She didn't tell me what happened. That's between you two." I said, "I know." She said, "I want to tell you something. I've been married twice. My first husband was not a good man and I left him when leaving was not what people did. My second husband was good and I loved him and I lost him and that was different." She said, "Every hard thing I've lived through, the one thing that got me out the other side was knowing that I could survive it. Not that it would get better. That I could survive." She said, "You can survive whatever this is." I said, "I know." She said, "I'm not saying that to comfort you. I'm saying it because it's true. I've watched you your whole life. You're someone who survives things." I said, "I know." She said, "Whatever you decide about whoever is involved, you'll be okay." I said, "Thank you, Grandma." She said, "I love you. And you were the best dressed." I laughed again. Real this time. Full this time. She said goodbye and hung up. I sat with the phone for a moment. The best dressed. I was getting ready an hour before and James was watching from the bathroom doorway and he said, "You look incredible." The corridor came later. Both of those things happened in the same night. Both of them are real. That's still true. That's still where I am. Day 14 tomorrow. I'll tell James what I've decided. I haven't decided yet. But I will. One more morning with the coffee on the counter. One more note with the temperature. One more day. Then the decision. I'll make it. I always make it. That's who I am. Whatever comes next, I'll make it. And I'll survive it. I know that the way I know the things that are simply true.